Dhurandhar is not propaganda. Here's why. So, for propaganda, one of the essential elements is centralization of narrative. That is not the case with a movie like Dhurandhar and the larger Bollywood ecosystem that it's come out in. For if the Bollywood was a centralized industry, we would not have movies like Ikkis, or maybe a few years ago, we would not have had movies like Pathan or Jawan, or had other movies which go against the current party's ideology. But clearly, there is something known as Indian state propaganda, or there are limits to the propaganda that could be defined. And I feel like if we start having the conversation on Dhurandhar as the gold standard for propaganda, we kind of miss the larger narrative. So let's talk about it. It is a fact that movies usually align with the ruling party's ideology. Recently, I was watching Badmaash Company, and in that there is almost an entire 2-minute scene dedicated solely to Manmohan Singh's economic reforms on import duty, on customs, which was reduced from 120% to 20%. And this move was criticized in the parliament for removing protection of Indian traders. And the actual dialogues mention this reduction in customs. It is a very big turning point in the movie for the plot as well. The Badmaash Company smuggling business stops because of it. And they have to relocate to the US because of Manmohan Singh's tariffs. And we see this in a lot of other movies. There's another movie about which I saw on Facebook where Manmohan Singh and Karunanidhi and one more politician was shown. But the scene that they were depicting, Karunanidhi wasn't even the chief minister, it was Jayalalitha. And this happens in almost every movie industry. It's very common. So clearly there are movies that are being released which do not align with the state's or with the ruling party's ideology. And therefore we cannot say that Dhurandhar is propaganda. If it is propaganda, then so are movies like Chak De India or Haider or any other movie which during the Congress regime aligned with the Congress. Can imbeciles please stop calling Rang De Basanti propaganda? That is embarrassing. Stop it. It's uncalled for. It's rude. Yeah, and in fact, a movie like Maidan, which is about a real Muslim coach who trains a real football team and makes them win a tournament, is a lot bolder in a BJP regime than a Chak De India movie is, where a Hindu coach is reframed as a Muslim character just to show that he's being discriminated for his religious identity. Just because that narrative aligned with the ruling party of that times, that is as much propaganda as Dhurandhar is. Where is the centralization? If this is a regime where movies like Maidan have also come out, are you really trying to trivialize such movies? Are you saying that they're not pro-Muslim just because they've not tried to show that Muslims are oppressed beyond reasonable doubt to appease a certain power? And therefore calling Dhurandhar propaganda takes away from the larger question on structural issues that content creators and movie makers face. Are movies suffering from a lot of bureaucracy and censorship? What about a movie like Punjab 95, which does in a way align with the ruling party in the sense that it is an anti-Congress movie talking about the extrajudicious police killings in Punjab and a man who investigated it. But the stance of that movie goes against the Indian state's official stance on the issue. Therefore, it is technically anti-India, but it may not necessarily be anti-BJP, but that is a grounds for it to be banned. You know, what about a movie like Dalit? It has also been banned, it has not been released. So yes, and using Punjab 95, I would like to make a larger point that the real propaganda is not exactly Dhurandhar, or it is not exactly Chak De India. These movies together form a corpus of Indian propaganda, and there are clearly outgroup movies which do not fall into Indian propaganda and they don't see the light of day. And that's why I come back to the point that Dhurandhar is not propaganda, because if we start saying Dhurandhar is propaganda, Chak De India is not propaganda, or we say that Chak De India is propaganda and Dhurandhar is not propaganda, when we get stuck in that binary, in a way we are legitimizing the system, right? The corpus of Indian propaganda. and we are legitimizing it and not allowing what is outside of this little sphere to remain outside of the sphere, to remain outside of the mainstream. When we classify these two movies and we try to say that, oh, something like Bajrangi Bhaijaan has a much better social message about religious unity than something like a Dhurandhar, we are essentially excluding movies like Punjab 95. And on the sacrificial altar of a Punjab 95, instead of questioning the system, we are trying to chest thump and promote the part of the system that we resonate with. And we are reinforcing the paternalistic nature of the government by saying that certain movies would be harmful to society as a whole, instead of trying to understand the structural shortcoming. Instead of enabling a deeper conversation about what constitutes propaganda and what constitutes not propaganda, or how much free speech is allowed in movies, whether it is coming from the left or the right. And how can one ignore the AIB podcast and the India's Got Latent? Both incidents show the paternalistic nature of the government, which should be questioned, which does trickle down into movies, as that is also entertainment. So the fact that Dhurandhar is allowed to be released, it shows that it is definitely under the corpus of Indian propaganda. But the fact that there is so much criticism to the movie, we can also say that it clearly does piss off a section of the institution of the Indian state. There is clearly a section of India, or the powers that be, that is pissed about this movie. And we can say that, it is part of the institution, but only a section of it. Meanwhile, a Punjab 95 will never see the light of day because it is not part of the institution. It may be part of a wing. It may be supported by a large number of people who are in the media houses of the BJP, but they are not able to go against the state. So there is clearly a definition of the state, and that definition of the state includes certain aspects of either parties and excludes certain aspects of either parties as well. So Dhurandhar therefore is not exactly propaganda. There is a reason that Anurag Kashyap, who usually finds himself against Hindutva or against the right-wing, at least stereotypically right-wing ideologies of India, has praised this movie because he understands that the Bollywood ecosystem for the last 30 years has had the Khans dominate. Right, they were very successful actors, but they were made the monopolists of the industry essentially post 2004, and that is also a fact. And that someone has put in their own money, their own effort. Geo Studios stopped funding the movie, but an actor and a director put in their own money to complete a project they were passionate about, which has garnered praise from another creator who understands what it means to be outside of a system and to still make something that is successful and that resonates with audiences. Both, he is the guy who created Gangs of Wasseypur after all. So we can understand the fact that yes, there is clearly some critical acclaim this movie has for a reason. Of course, it has picked a side and it's really, choosing to die on that hill as well in many instances. But either all of it is propaganda or none of it is. And liberalization did help with taking movies away from the government, with Morarji Desai breaking up the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting to the 1991 reforms, of course, which allowed foreign movie creators to lend their technology to Indian movie makers so they could make their movies bigger, grander, use better cameras, things like that. So yes, that combined with maybe deregulation on what sort of content you're allowed to produce and maybe more liberal censorship laws and possibly laws that separate parties and political actors from entering the creative space very directly and, creating separation between these two institutions. That sort of deregulation and post-regulation is what we should actually push for. And that's the nature of that is what the conversation should be around. Conversation no one's having right now and everyone's just caught up in reinforcing the paternalistic nature of the government by saying that, oh, this is propaganda. Oh, no, that was not propaganda. This is propaganda. Instead of asking that bigger question, that how and what shape should liberalization of the movie industry actually take. So on that thought, follow for more and let me know in the comments what you think. How should liberalization of the movie industry happen? And follow for more.